I raised my glass of sparkling water and smiled across the table at my grandmother. The candlelight caught the silver in her hair, and she looked so small sitting there in her favorite blue cardigan, the one she wore every Thanksgiving without fail. "Grandma," I said, loud enough for her to hear me over the noise of the table, "thank you so much for the birthday check. The $500 really helped with my rent this month." She set down her fork, very slowly, the way she does when something has confused her deeply. "Sophie," she said, and the table went quieter than it had any right to, "I didn't send you $500. I laughed a little. "No, I know it probably felt like a lot, but honestly, you didn't have to. Sophie." Her voice was sharper now. "I sent you $50,000. I remember the exact sound the room made after that. Nothing. Not a fork scraping a plate, not a glass being set down, not a breath. Just the hum of the overhead light in my aunt's dining room and the distant sound of football from the living room where the kids had wandered off to." I looked at my grandmother's face. She was not joking. Eleanor Marsh, 81 years old, former high school principal, a woman who once sent back a restaurant bill because they had overcharged her 11 cents, was not joking. "Grandma," I said carefully, "I received a check for $500. I deposited it myself." She turned and looked down the table, not at me, past me, at my uncle. And that was the moment I understood that something had gone very, very wrong. I need to back up. Because what happened at that Thanksgiving table did not begin at that table. It began 8 months earlier, in February, when my grandmother called me to tell me she had updated her estate plan. I was living in Columbus at the time, working as a forensic accountant for a mid-size firm that specialized in financial fraud investigation. I had been doing the job for 6 years. I was good at it. My grandmother knew exactly what I did for a living, and she was proud of it in the quiet, specific way she was proud of things. She kept a copy of my firm's website printed out in a folder in her kitchen drawer, next to her crossword puzzles. When she called me in February, she explained that she had decided to distribute a portion of her savings while she was still alive and well enough to see it happen. She had 3 adult children, my mother, who passed away when I was 19, my uncle, and my aunt and 4 grandchildren. She had decided to give each grandchild a lump sum as an early inheritance. For me, her eldest grandchild, she had designated $50,000. She told me she had already discussed it with my uncle, who managed her finances. She told me the transfer would happen within a few weeks, handled through her bank. She told me to use it wisely, but also to use it for something that made me happy. I cried on the phone with her for about 4 minutes. Then I pulled myself together and told her I loved her, and that I would call her Sunday like I always did. In March, I received a check in the mail. It came in a pale blue envelope with my grandmother's handwriting on the front. Inside was a birthday card, my birthday is in March, and a check for $500, drawn from my grandmother's personal checking account, signed in her looping cursive. I thought the $50,000 must be coming separately. A wire transfer, maybe, or a cashier's check through the estate attorney. I deposited the $500, wrote her a thank you note, and waited. April came, then May, then June. No transfer arrived. I told myself there were probably legal reasons for the delay. Estate distributions could be complicated. My uncle had power of attorney over her finances. He had held it for 3 years, since she had a minor health scare that turned out to be nothing, and I assumed he was handling the paperwork methodically. He had always struck me as methodical. Precise. The kind of man who kept spreadsheets for his grocery runs. By August, I was less patient and more curious. I called my grandmother on a Sunday, as I always did, and I steered the conversation gently toward the topic of the money. "Has the transfer been complicated?" I asked. "I just want to make sure everything is going through properly." There was a pause on her end that I catalogued without understanding. "Your uncle told me it was handled in March," she said. He showed me the confirmation. I was sitting at my kitchen table when she said that. I had a cup of coffee in front of me and a case file open on my laptop. I closed the laptop. "He showed you a confirmation," I said. "Yes. A printout from the bank. Your name, the account number, the amount. $50,000. He said you had already received it." I kept my voice completely even. It was not hard. 6 years of fraud investigation had taught me that the moment you let alarm into your voice, the information flow stops. "Of course," I said. I just wanted to make sure it had processed on your end. You know how banks are." She laughed and said yes, she did know how banks are, and then she told me about the crossword she had been struggling with all week. And I listened and responded normally for another 20 minutes, and then I said goodbye and I love you and I hung up the phone. Then I sat very still at my kitchen table for a long time. Let me explain what I do at work. When a company suspects internal fraud, they call my firm. We come in, we request financial records, and we trace money. Not just the obvious movements, transfers, withdrawals, deposits, but the subtle ones. The paper trails that people think they've hidden. The timing anomalies. The accounts that appear legitimate until you look at the beneficial owner. The shell structures that make stolen money look like it simply moved somewhere reasonable. I had spent 6 years learning how to find money that someone had tried to make disappear. I did not call my uncle. I did not call my aunt. I did not call my grandmother back and tell her what I suspected. I opened my laptop and I started working. The first thing I did was pull my own financial records going back to January. Every deposit, every transfer, every transaction in every account I held. I had received the $500 check in March. I had received nothing else. There was no wire transfer. There was no cashier's check. There was no $50,000 anywhere in my financial history. The second thing I did was think carefully about what my grandmother had told me. A printout from the bank. My name, my account number, the amount. My uncle had shown her a document that purported to confirm a $50,000 transfer to my account. That document was either a forgery or it referenced an account I did not own. I requested a formal audit trail from my own bank, certified in writing, showing every inbound transfer over $100 in the past 12 months. It arrived 4 days later. No transfer from my grandmother's account. No transfer in the amount of $50,000. Nothing. I now had written confirmation that no money had reached me. What I needed next was to understand where it had gone. My grandmother's financial accounts were managed through a local bank in the town where she had lived for 40 years. My uncle had been added as a joint account holder 3 years ago, in addition to holding power of attorney. This meant he had full access to deposit, withdraw, and transfer funds without her direct involvement in each transaction. I could not access her account records directly, but I could access something adjacent. I called my grandmother's estate attorney. I introduced myself, reminded him of my name and my relationship to Eleanor Marsh, and told him I was a forensic accountant and that I had reason to believe there may have been an unauthorized transaction in my grandmother's accounts. I asked him whether he had been involved in facilitating the transfer of $50,000 to me in March. He had not. He told me he had not been consulted about any such transfer. He told me that the estate plan he had on file indicated a distribution to me, but that no formal distribution order had come through his office. I thanked him and told him I would be in touch. What I knew now, my grandmother believed I had received $50,000. The estate attorney had not facilitated any transfer. I had received $500 and nothing else. My uncle had shown my grandmother a document claiming the transfer had been completed. The picture was not complicated. The picture was, in fact, very clear. The only question was the mechanics, exactly how it had been done, exactly where the money had gone, and exactly who else was involved. I did not assume my uncle had acted alone. In my experience, financial fraud within families is rarely a solo effort. It requires someone to draft the documents, someone to execute the transfers, someone to manage the paper trail, and usually someone to provide cover when questions arise. I began pulling publicly available records. My uncle had started a business 18 months ago, a property investment LLC, registered in his wife's name. I cross-referenced the LLC's registration date with the timeline of my grandmother's estate planning conversations. The LLC had been registered 2 months after my grandmother first told my uncle she intended to distribute funds to her grandchildren. The timing was not a coincidence. In 6 years of fraud investigation, timing is never a coincidence. I drove home for Thanksgiving. I want to be clear about something. I did not drive home for Thanksgiving in order to make a scene. I drove home because my grandmother asked me to come, and because I had not seen her since the previous Christmas, and because I loved her and I was not going to let what I had discovered change the way I showed up for her. I also drove home with a folder. The folder contained a certified copy of my bank audit trail showing no transfer from my grandmother's account. It contained the registration documents for my uncle's LLC. It contained a timeline I had constructed showing the sequence of events from my grandmother's estate planning conversation in February to the present day. It also contained something I had acquired through a professional contact, not illegally, but through the kind of network that forensic accountants build over years in the field, a summary of outgoing transfers from accounts associated with my grandmother's banking relationship in March. $50,000 had moved. It had moved from my grandmother's personal savings account on March 14th, the same week I received the $500 birthday check. It had moved to an intermediary account, and from there to the operating account of the Property Investment LLC, registered in my aunt's name. I had the documentation. I had the timeline. I had the pattern. I arrived on Wednesday evening. My uncle greeted me at the door with a hug and asked about the drive. My aunt had made the spare room up nicely. My grandmother was in the kitchen, and she held my face in both her hands for a moment before she said anything, which is what she always does, and I held it together completely. Thanksgiving dinner was the next afternoon. 12 people at the table, my uncle at one end, my grandmother at the other, my aunt and her husband, 2 cousins, one with a new girlfriend, my uncle's adult son from his first marriage, who I had always liked, neighbors who came every year and brought the same pie. The turkey was good. The conversation was the usual mix of football and local news and someone's renovation project. My grandmother had made her cranberry sauce from scratch, the way she had for 50 years. After the main course, while we were waiting on dessert, my uncle made a small toast. He raised his glass toward my grandmother and said something warm and practiced about family and gratitude and her generosity. I watched my grandmother's face while he spoke. She was smiling, but there was something underneath the smile that I recognized, now that I knew what to look for, a kind of careful uncertainty, the expression of someone who has been told a version of events and has been living with a quiet doubt about whether it was true. When my uncle finished, I set my glass down. "I'd like to say something too," I said. There are moments in a conversation when the air changes. This was one of them. My uncle's smile stayed in place, but it became a held thing, a controlled thing, no longer automatic. "Of course," he said. I looked at my grandmother first. "Grandma, when we spoke in August, you told me that the transfer had already been confirmed, that your bank had processed $50,000 to my account in March." She nodded slowly. "I never received that money," I said. "I had my bank issue a certified audit trail, in writing, of every inbound transfer over $100 for the past year. There is no transfer from your account. There is no $50,000. The table was very quiet. My uncle started to speak. I kept going. "I am a forensic accountant. This is what I do every day. I trace money. So when I realized something had gone wrong, I traced it. I reached into the bag I had kept beside my chair throughout dinner, and I took out the folder. I set it on the table. The $50,000 left your account, Grandma. It went to an intermediary account, and then to the operating account of a Property Investment LLC registered in February of last year." I looked at my aunt. "In your name." My aunt said nothing. She had gone a very particular shade of white that I recognized as the color of someone who has just understood that the ground has shifted beneath them and there is nowhere to step. My uncle stood up. "Sophie, I don't know what you think you're looking at, but this is not the time or the place." "I have the bank documentation," I said. "I have the LLC registration. I have the transfer records. I have the timeline. I have a statement from your mother's estate attorney confirming he was never consulted about any distribution to me." I looked at him steadily. "I have everything. And I want you to understand that I am not angry. I am not here to have a fight at Thanksgiving. I am here because my grandmother deserves to know what happened to her money." My grandmother's voice was very quiet when she spoke. "Is this true?" My uncle sat back down. He looked at his plate. He did not answer her. My grandmother looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at my aunt. Then she looked at me. "Show me," she said. I opened the folder and I walked her through it, item by item, the way I walk clients through findings at the end of an investigation, slowly and clearly, with documentation for every claim, the transfer date, the amount, the destination account. the LLC. The timeline. She asked 3 questions, the kind of precise, practical questions that reminded me she had run a school for 30 years and had never once been easy to fool. When I finished, she folded her hands on the table. No one spoke for what felt like a long time. The neighbor's pie was still sitting in the kitchen, untouched. The football game was still on in the living room where the children had gone. My uncle tried once more. He said something about a misunderstanding, about accounts that had been reorganized, about a conversation that he and my grandmother had apparently had that she didn't remember correctly. My grandmother looked at him while he spoke and did not say a word, and when he finished, she said, very calmly, "I would like you to call David." David was her attorney. The call happened in the study, the 3 of them, while the rest of us sat at the table, and the neighbors talked quietly about leaving, and my cousin's girlfriend looked at the ceiling with the focused expression of someone trying very hard to be invisible. 3 days later, my grandmother's estate attorney filed a formal complaint with the bank. The bank opened a fraud investigation. My uncle's power of attorney was revoked. The property LLC was frozen pending investigation. 4 months after that, my uncle and my aunt entered into a civil settlement agreement. The full $50,000 was returned to my grandmother's account, plus interest and legal fees. They also faced a separate referral to the district attorney's office, which is still ongoing as I record this. My grandmother called me the evening the settlement was finalized. She did not say much. She said she was glad I had come home for Thanksgiving. She said she was sorry it had taken this long for the truth to come out, as though she were somehow responsible for the delay. I told her she had nothing to be sorry about. I told her that the people who do this kind of thing are very good at making sure the people they love don't see it coming. "You saw it," she said. "I was looking," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I always told your mother you were the sharp one." I had to put the phone down for a minute after that. There is something I want to say, for anyone listening who has ever had a quiet doubt about something in their family's finances. An explanation that didn't quite add up. A transfer that no one could fully account for. A document you were shown once and never again. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to look. You are allowed to take those doubts seriously even when everyone around you is telling you that you're overthinking it, that it's a clerical error, that families don't do things like that. Families do things like that. Some of them do, and it doesn't mean you failed to love them enough or trust them correctly. It just means you needed to look. My grandmother is 81 years old. She has her crossword puzzles and her Sunday phone calls and her cranberry sauce recipe and the blue cardigan she wears every Thanksgiving without fail. She deserved to know the truth. She deserved someone in that room who had looked carefully enough to find it. I was glad I was there. For everyone asking what happened next as of this recording, the district attorney's office review is still pending. My relationship with my uncle and aunt is, as you might expect, non-existent. My grandmother and I speak every Sunday. She started a new crossword book last month and has already finished half of it. She told me the clues this year are harder than usual and she suspects the puzzle editor is showing off. I told her I suspected she was right.